Welcome to the Tales of a Red Clay Rambler podcast, featuring interviews with culture makers from around the world. This is Ben Carter. I'm going to be your host. If you'd like more information on the show, please visit our website, talesofaredclayrambler.com. Welcome back to episode 439 of the podcast. Thank you all for tuning in. Today on the show, I'm talking with Patty Bilbro, who is a ceramic artist that's based in New Mexico. She received training in pottery through the Professional Crafts program at Haywood Community College, but has recently shifted her focus towards sculptural vessels, which are painted with geometry and the human figure. In our interview, we talk about how her approach to the figure has changed over time, and how a day job supports her exploration of sculpture. To see examples of her work, you can visit her website. That's pattybilbro.com. Before we get to that interview, I wanted to thank the folks that have donated to our fund drive. I'd specifically like to thank Danny Farley and Dylan Tierney for their recent contributions. If you'd like to get involved yourself, you can do so at the website. That's talesofaredclayrambler.com/donate. Without further ado, we'll get to the interview. Yeah, well, let's start there, actually. How did you end up in New Mexico?
See, I was living outside of Philadelphia in Wilmington, Delaware. So I'd kind of been slowly moving up the East Coast. I was, born in Alabama, and then I lived in North Carolina forever, and then Baltimore for about 5 years, and then I was living in Wilmington, Delaware. And I was just kind of done with the crunch of people and the cold and the weather, and I just wanted something new, and it was getting so expensive all up and down the East Coast. And so I'd lived in the Southwest for about a year when I was 8, and I'd always wanted to come back to this region. And so my girlfriend at the time and I decided to move here, and we picked up and came to Albuquerque. We kind of looked at different places that were still affordable and had some of the weather and the nature that we were looking for. And that was in 2016. So yeah, and then I was in Albuquerque for about 4 or 5 years, and then just moved to a little town called Madrid, New Mexico, which is about 30 minutes south of Santa Fe, and moved in with my girlfriend, and have been here. It'll be a year in November.
Because I feel like I know you from Asheville, because you lived in Asheville for a long time, right?
Yep. Yeah. And I was at Odyssey a few years after you were, I think. I lived in Asheville for 19 years. And that's kind of where I got my solid, studio production potter throwing skills that have been like a blessing and a curse.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because I feel like I might have had the same experience. Well, we kind of know how they're a blessing, but how were they a curse?
It's really hard to get out of the mindset of production, and because to do production work, you have to be really, I think, pretty regimented and quick, and produce, of course, multiples, and kind of you get. I think it's for me personally. I don't think this happens for everybody. Kind of made it harder for me to loosen up and explore more, and just really get out of the mindset of linking money to production or money to what I'm making. And that's kind of the big thing, is like trying to remove the need and the feeling that I need to make money off of what I'm doing in the most efficient and best way possible.
Yeah, I mean, creativity is just not efficient. Like I
Yes.
feel like good ideas like go this way and that way and this way. It's like a circle sometimes. It's not the most smooth.
And for the longest time, my goal was to try and make a living off of my work. And and so that was, kind of what I was aiming for years, like decades. And I always had supplemental income, like waiting tables. There was a couple years, there was a 2-year period where I just made pots, and made a living off of that. And it was great for the freedom of time. But I did it long enough to know that it wasn't what I wanted to do full time. But then there was still it took me a long time to move away from that. And I still struggle with when I sit down to make work, of not making it from that mindset of production and trying to make a living off of it. I think it inhibits, for me personally, it inhibits taking more risks. And so, I went, and I don't know if you know this part, but a few years back, I decided that I was going to go to nursing school. And so I went to nursing school to have a more stable income, but that still allowed me the flexibility of time in the studio. Um, and so now I'm really very intentionally moving away from that framework. And it's a lot easier because I have more stable income and I have the flexibility. And so I've been moving more into the direction of doing sculpture and moving away from functional.
So with the nursing, how did you come to that specifically? I mean, I know the medical field's really big. What made you want to do nursing?
I was attracted to the flexibility of scheduling and time. And I feel I had a lot of friends that went from, waiting tables and working in restaurants into nursing. And there's actually a lot of similarities between the two. That they're both very service oriented. And and it felt like something that I could do that didn't feel like, um, it kind of didn't feel like a cop out, I guess, if that makes any sense. Like it felt like I would still be doing something that meant something, um, which I question sometimes I'm in the middle of a shift, but but yeah, that was kind of the path to getting there is, allowing more independence and flexibility of time and financial stability.
Are you doing 12-hour shifts?
Yeah. I'm a little sleepy this morning because I just got finished with my 312s,
Wow.
last night. So
My wife's family, a bunch of her family are nurses or doctors, and so I kind of understand that you're doing good work, but it takes a toll. I mean, it takes a physical toll, obviously, with long shifts. It also takes an emotional toll because people need you and they need specific things from you. Like, tell me about that experience.
yeah, it's exhausting. It's emotionally exhausting because it's, you're for 3 days. And when, I go in for my 3 shifts, I pretty much have to just say goodbye to my real life, um, because you just can't do anything else but go to work. Um, and then people need you, and um, they're in really vulnerable. They're in the most vulnerable places they've ever been, and so, you're working with people that are super vulnerable and have a lot of high needs. Um, and then on top of that, you're just working within a super broken system. And so your ability to actually provide the things that people need, which oftentimes is, just the symptoms of decades and decades of poverty and, just the inability to actually care for themselves from this broken, health system that we have. So it's like it's impossible to fill the full needs of people. So it's exhausting, but it's also pretty rewarding. Um, the thing that I do that brings me a lot of reward is intentional eye contact, which you'd be surprised at how many people don't do that, especially in the hospital setting, and how that can just elicit just a real connecting response. So there's still a lot of connection that happens, but that is something that I have to be more intentional about, is connecting with people in that way.
So I think you have a degree in crafts, but don't you also have a degree in psychology as well?
Yes, I have a production craft degree from Haywood. Did you go to? You didn't go to Haywood,
I
did
didn't.
you?
I went to Appalachian State, so I'm familiar with that sort of ecosystem, but I didn't go there.
Okay, yeah. So I went to Haywood to get an associate's degree in clay production in like '94, I think, and then and I actually, after that, because I was too overwhelmed with the thought of setting up a studio, because of that whole idea that, like, if you're gonna make pots, then you have to have this whole, like, you have to have land, and you have to have all the kilns, and you have to have, and that was at that time, I was 24, and I was like, there's no way I'm going to get all this. And because I didn't have an understanding of being able to, like, you know, make pots in your kitchen, or like on your back porch, like piecing together the kind of studio that you can work with that fits your life. It was just, it was hard for me to imagine. And so I actually didn't make work for about 8 years. And then during that time, I went back and got a psychology degree and worked in mental health for a while, doing case management with kids that were either had been removed from the home and in, like, residential treatment centers, or at risk of going into residential treatment. And then I had this little 13-year-old kid break the windshield on my car, and I decided, I think I'm going to go back to making pots. And so, and that's when I went back into um, making things again. But I didn't make anything for probably about 7 or 8 years.
The reason I'm thinking about psychology is that so much of nursing is, it seems to me, is that there's the acute need of, like, what is your medical need? But like you said, looking someone in the eyes when they're scared, like, that is a psychological need. So how does that overlap? Like, do you think that your previous work in mental health, how is that helping in the nursing?
I'm not sure. I think it's just I think actually it's just a personality thing. I think it's just because, there's different people that have psychology backgrounds that um, I'm amazed have psychology backgrounds in nursing, that don't have that. I think it's just an individual understanding of connecting with people. Um, but I mean, I think it helps me as far as, like, understanding, like, we get a lot of behavioral holds and a lot of people that are in dementia or a mental health crisis. And so it helps with that, just kind of understanding what's happening there. But as far as just the human connection part, I think that's just an individual personality.
Well, man, I'm so glad that you're doing that work. I mean, I know that there's a shortage. I mean, I guess depends on the state and where you're at, but our medical system, because of COVID and pre-COVID, is like in a serious crunch. So I'm glad
It is.
glad that you're doing that work.
Thank you.
Well, one of the things I'm interested in is how you've approached the figure in your work over time. I was looking at what I think of as your work 1.0, which is pots, but that have figure drawings, but that the figure is like line drawings on a lighter ground. But then now, when you're approaching the figure, it's almost like you've switched from red figureware to black figureware in Greek pottery. Like now the body is black figure on a red ground. So you've kind of switched up the way you're doing that. Can you talk about the progression of those?
Sure. The first set of pots with the stick figures were, um, I think actually all of it came out of, like, how I'm doing them come out of the material. So I'm working with what the materials are kind of the base, um, and then I do what works with the material. So when I was at Haywood, I was working with Chinos, and realized somewhere along the way that the Chinos were really stable and they could hold an underglazed line on top of it. And so I was originally doing no drawings at all, and it was just Chino pots. And so then I just decided one time to just put a stick figure on one of the pots. And it was kind of from this, anti-fine art place of, just doing like super raw stick figure. And so it was actually the material that preceded the figures. And it's kind of the same thing that's happening with the figure work now, because I did the stick figure work for a long time, like probably about 10 or 15 years, something like that. And I got tired of chasing gas kilns, because I was doing high fire gas kilns. And then for a period of time, I transitioned and was doing soda fired, and the drawings shifted a little bit then based off of the materials again. So I started playing around with slips and soda firing, and then my drawings shifted after I started doing that type of firing. And they started getting more, I don't know, concept and less stick figure-y, even though they were still pretty much line drawings. And then I intentionally went through a process where I was trying to create a low fire or mid-range process so that I could move away from gas kilns and atmospheric kilns. And so then I moved into doing earthenware for a little bit. And then when I moved to New Mexico, I was doing terra sigillata on earthenwares with drawings. And then I started experimenting with taking the terra sigillatas to Cone 6. And then I made an abrupt decision that I was tired of doing narrative work. And so I started doing just straight geometric patterns and simplified surfaces on the Cone 6 terra sigillata. And that's really what I've been focused on the last several years. And it hasn't been till this past year that I started bringing back in the drawings. And they're kind of were reminiscent of the Soto fire drawings that I was doing. But I had been, so it was kind of just doing the same process that I was doing the geometric pattern work with, but then just doing drawings instead of the patterns. And I incorporate the geometric patterns in the surface too. But so it's always kind of been the style of the figures has always come out of the material and how I was already using the materials. And the current work, I like the idea of them being silhouettes, which is it has that kind of silhouette figure to them, but the starkness between the black and the background. And the figures are kind of more genderless. And so I think the silhouette aspect helps with that, of just these kind of genderless falling figures that I relate to.
With the stick figures, I noticed that a lot of it was turned on the facial expression, so like there was some sense of like eye movement or mouth movement, that what was giving the emotional character. But with the new or newer black figure where it's the body position, like you're talking about a falling figure, like falling is in a way our worst nightmare. It's the thing that we dream about sometimes, So tell me about that. Well, one, being able to nail a body position, as in like render the body position so it looks like falling. Like, how do you do that? And then tell me about what that means.
So I started originally doing the falling work on, I think, the earthenware and then the soda fired pots when I was like playing around with that. But I didn't really put much of those out there to sell. But it was right when Trump got elected. And it just really felt like we were in a free fall. And then, and I was also right after I was living in Baltimore, and when the police killed Freddie Gray, and there was the uprising there, and there was just, the world just felt very chaotic, and I felt like we were just all in a free fall. But so that's where it originated, and then I didn't do anything about it for another, I don't know, I guess 6 years. And then I just started feeling compelled to do the work again, but it's from a slightly different place. I mean, I think the difference between what the ones I'm doing now and the ones that I was doing then is that they're, the figures are falling, but they're also all falling together. So it's this, there's this kind of duality of falling but connected and connected. So that's kind of where that came from. And then the way that I get the positioning is that I get down to my underwear and I go out in the front yard and I fling my body around and put the camera on timed pictures. And so I will spend like, I don't know, 30 minutes or so in the front yard flinging myself around and jumping up in the air and flipping around and taking pictures of myself. And then yeah, so that part is kind of integral in the process, and it's also a lot of fun. And I have a lot of really funny pictures of myself on my phone. But and sometimes I go in and I look at the pictures and then do the drawings, but often it's, I have an idea of specific body, or there's a specific space on the surface that I want to put a body. And so then I'll go out with the idea of like, well, I want the body to fit in this space. So then I try and fling myself into that position. So yeah, that's how the bodies get to be like that.
Well, I want to take us on a tangent. I was watching some of the video work that you do. And I think these are collaborative videos with your partner, right?
Yes.
And there's one called How to Stop Time and Other Futile Endeavors. And it's a narrative over top, but the way you are both moving the body is similar in a way to what it sounds. So what's the connection with body movement? Like, it almost looks like, what is it called? It's a dance style. It's not interpretive dance. It's basically improvisational dance when you're dancing with another person. Like, you're interacting with their body, like in that way. What's your connection to movement in this way?
I'm glad you're watching those videos. They're super weird, and it's a completely new medium for both of us. My girlfriend Lori she's an amazing painter and jeweler, and then when we came together, we started doing these collaborative videos and other things, and so we've really taken off doing those. And the movement came out of, I mean, it's we're dealing with some of the similar themes of just like relationships to others, and how that's kind of we are in a dance together, and we're also just in general in life, we're kind of it's kind of a dance that we have to do to navigate our lives. And so that's kind of where that came from, and just also the idea of in relationship of whether that's with, an intimate partner or friends or family, that there's often a push and pull that happens there, and just kind of playing that out. And then the other side of it is it just feels really good to just move your body in that way. And I used to do performance when I was younger. I did some drag shows, and I had a friend who we would do like, street performance on the corner sometimes, or do a lot of acrobatic stuff. And I hadn't done it in a long time. And Lori is an aerial artist also. And so then it kind of brought back that for me, that performance, or that way of moving my body. And so Yeah, that's where that came from. And those videos, actually, a lot of from that specific one that you watched, we we recorded ourselves moving around, and then they're all in reverse, so that it gets that kind of weird movement look to it.
That makes sense because at one point the dirt moves in a way that I could tell didn't make sense, but it makes sense backwards.
Yes. Yeah, we're doing it so you can't really tell that it's completely backwards, but it just looks a little bit off. And so that it adds that element of, I think it just makes it just slightly more interesting. Um, so we'll record some videos with just like rolling around on the ground. But then when we put it in reverse and like edit and speed up and slow down, then it becomes really interesting. And I'm not like, by any means, I am not trained in body movement. I'm super not flexible. And there's one video in that particular little short that we did where I was having knee problems and my knees were super swollen. I could barely bend them. So I'm like, well, I'll just like walk around on my tiptoes. And so just playing with, what we have. And that's kind of what I'm trying to incorporate more into just my work in general, of just like there doesn't have to be this level of perfection, or even a level of like, you don't really have to know what you're doing to create things. And that's where those videos came from. They're super raw. They're not professional. But they're just about creating and, saying things that we want to say.
Some of them are narrative, like the one about the squirrel. It's a story of you when you were, I think, a teenager, and maybe you could just tell that story so people will understand what we're talking about.
Yeah, that's a true story from my life. I think I was 13 or around. I was in middle school, and I can just tell how, I guess it's in the story. I rode the bus to and from a school that was about an hour away, or it was an hour bus ride. It wasn't an hour away, but and then I would be dropped off at the local elementary school, and then I would walk home. And I was walking home one day, and I also played the violin at the time, so I was carrying my violin, and I came across a dead squirrel in the road, and it made me really sad. And it wasn't squished; it was just this like perfectly intact dead squirrel. And so I decided that I was going to take it home, and I was going to bury it in our backyard. And so I picked up the squirrel and started walking home. And then I saw this woman coming up over the hill, and I started to panic because I didn't want her to see me carrying a dead squirrel, because I thought, she's going to think I'm super weird. So I hid the squirrel behind my violin case and was like walking down the street with the dead squirrel behind my violin case and holding it in front of me, which I'm sure also looked very awkward. And and then right before I came face to face with the woman, I was about 8 feet away from her, and the squirrel slipped and it fell out from behind my violin case. And she saw the squirrel, and we both looked down at the squirrel, and then we both looked up and locked eyes. And she didn't say anything, and I didn't say anything, and I just kept walking, and that was that.
Oh, I love the video because it's a simple animation.
That was the first one we did. Super simple, super raw. We actually came up with that idea in the morning, and we recorded it and did the animation and edited it and finished it by the end of the day, because it's like super raw, but it was super fresh. And I think that's kind of what we're going for, is that real fresh element. And all the videos are slightly different, because we're trying not to just repeat what we've already done.
It feels like a memory sketch, like you're drawing from a real experience, but the sketch quality of the cartooning, or like it almost looks like stop animation or something like that are not stop, but like there's things moving, but they're like herky jerky, and like it has a really beautiful quality. But also that story, I was watching the video earlier, and it just made me laugh because I can relate to that when someone else is acknowledging that you're being weird, but do you both acknowledge that?
Yes.
I've been in so many experiences like that.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that's what everybody loves that video because it's a universal feeling of awkwardness. And that there's no resolution to it. You just like, there's no like trying to explain. It's just, that's just how it is.
You just got to own the awkwardness. You just got to go through it,
Yes.
not around it.
Exactly.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors. This episode of the podcast is sponsored by Amoco Brent. For the past 100 years, Amoco Brent has been creating ceramic supplies for our community, ranging from underglazes to electric kilns, and they have no plans of slowing down. With over 3,000 products, Amoco Brent's top priority is making sure that all of their customer needs are met. From the professional to the student and everyone in between, their high-quality materials enable you to make your best work. To learn more, check them out at amoco.com or on Instagram and Facebook at Amoco Brent. You can also show them how you use Amoco by sharing your work online with the hashtag HowIAmoco. In terms of the sculptural work that you're making, because you mentioned that you kind of moved a little bit away from pots for the time being, or at least you're focused on sculpture. How do you approach sculpture physically, but also conceptually? Because it's different than like putting an image on a pot and putting an image on a sculpture. It doesn't quite work that same way. So what's your approach?
I'm kind of trying to incorporate, the other times I've tried to experiment with sculpture, I felt like I had to move away from the wheel for some reason. I don't know. It's weird things you tell yourself. And then I came back to realizing that I love throwing. Like, even if I want to move away from functional, to functional work, I just love throwing. And so I decided that I was just going to use that strength, but then also try and bring a little bit more just freshness to it. And so I throw a bunch of different shapes and then just without any kind of idea about what I want the final form to look like. And then I spend some time just basically cutting them up and putting them together and stacking. And so that's kind of where that came from. And then from there, the drawings are kind of fit around the surface. So I'm thinking of the form first, and because I also don't want to just make work for the figures, because there's also a challenging aspect for me to try and figure out, because sometimes I'll make the forms and then they'll sit in my studio for weeks because I have no idea how I have no idea how I'm gonna make this work with what I want to do with the figures. And so I just have to study the form for a while until I get an idea of, oh, okay, I can do that. And then the process of like flinging my body around happens. And then, and I like the aspect of it being so slow that it takes me a long time to finish a couple pieces, which is so different from what I'm used to. And then it incorporates the things that I love. And then that's what I'm also trying to do is I'm just trying to make work that feels good and that excites me. And I know that I'll probably always make functional work here and there, but I definitely just want to cut back on that. And every time I'm in the middle of doing a batch of mugs, I'm like, this is why I went to nursing school, so I didn't have to do this anymore. But then I finished the mugs and I'm like, oh, I do like mugs and I love people drinking out of my mugs. And so, yeah.
What I like is that the sculptural vessels that I've seen, it's a blend of everything. Like, you'll have the geometric patterning, you'll have the figure, you'll have, the thrown parts. It does feel like a culmination in some ways, like it's everything added together. But I had some questions about the geometry, because I've looked a lot at your pots. Once you went to the black on top of that orangish, reddish background, it is so strong visually that all the images look great. Like it's amazing. Like the way those pots photograph is phenomenal. But what is the black? Like how it almost seems atmospheric, but it's not. So what's how do you get it to look like that?
Well, the black is my favorite black, which is the Duncan Easy Stroke, Easy 010. But I think Mako just bought.
Oh, did
If
they?
I'm
Okay.
Yeah, but it's still, this is one of, they got rid of a lot of them, but they kept this one because this one it's the best black I've ever used. And I discovered it because that's the same black that a lot of the Pueblo potters that aren't using the traditional method, they use this black because it's like a black. And so I use that. And the reason it looks atmospheric is there's some kind of relationship between the specific clay that I'm using, the specific terra sigillata I'm using, and this specific black. And it took a while to like figure that combination out. But so this black will kind of create a halo around it on the terra sigillata. It almost flashes. And so it just creates that great depth. And it's just on top of the terra sigillata. And then I go in kind of like atmospheric pots also, and I do a real fine sand. And so it becomes super smooth.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful contrast. And you mentioned that indigenous potters in your area are using that, but it also the geometry feels a little bit like some of the Maori tattooing. Like there's a lot of different cultural references that geometry kind of draws to mind. When you're thinking about geometry though, like let's say on a sculpture versus a pot, like is there any difference there?
The way I'm thinking about it is more of a balance. I mean, in the pots, the geometry and the patterns are all that, they are the balance. That's what I'm creating. And with the figurative work on the sculptural pieces, they are also creating a balance between like the really organicness of the bodies and then the geometric and spiky. And I use a lot of the kind of sharp, spiky, I guess just spikes, not spiky, but spikes. Because I feel like that's also an element of just in relation to the bodies and in relation to like walking through the world. There's just so many like sharp points everywhere. And so that's part of the falling figures too. Like, I mean, I did one piece where it was sharp spikes and then hands and then two figures, and you couldn't really tell if the large hands were catching the figures or dropping the figures. And that's kind of in the same role that the spikes play, is just kind of these, we're falling and but we're also connected, and we're also have all these, sharp spikes and sharp edges around us, and how do we navigate that? So that's kind of, and then there's also, they play a role of being space fillers in a way that I think is pleasing to the eye. If I feel like something needs, if I need something in this space, but I want to keep it simple because I don't want to over decorate with the figures, because I want them to still remain very simple. And so it's another way of adding in a design element, but still maintaining that simplicity.
And they really establish a rhythm. I mean, I think maybe that's just the way that my eye reads geometry. Like I'm thinking about pattern and repetition and how many spikes are there and how, like my brain just kind of does that trick.
Yeah.
But I wanted to end our interview talking about how you've sort of known yourself or gotten to know yourself better over time. And I want to reference you did an interview a bunch of years back with Paul Blaze, and I was listening to that in preparation for this. And you were talking about growing up in Alabama and being a queer kid in Alabama, and just that getting to know yourself took, I think you said it took energy. It just took time and energy. And so I wondered, how is your sort of process of knowing yourself as a person paralleled your process of knowing yourself as an artist? Like, do you see those as being separate? They're together. How do they influence each other?
That's a good question. I think at this point in my life, I have a real understanding of how together they are. And when you were saying that about the work that I'm making now feels like a culmination of all these different places that I've been with my work. And it's kind of the same I am with my life right now too. And I really do feel like uh, the work that I've made in the past, um, there always felt like there was something not quite right, not something not quite there that I was looking for. And the work I'm making now just feels like it is a real culmination of my experience of making and the taking the things that I like from the past of making and putting it all together in a way that um, I'm just really content and happy with the work I'm making right now. And I'm sure that that will grow and change again. But just that I feel like I've gotten all the piece parts together to now I can actually focus on some of the concepts and just play and being fresh and like allowing myself, creative freedom to just move around within that context. And it's the same with where I am in my life. Um, yeah, I mean, growing up queer in, the 80s and 90s in Alabama, to now, it is a big difference. And um, a lot of that is that the world has changed a lot. And a lot of that is that I have just become much more comfortable with myself. Um, I have a very androgynous presentation, and I move through the world in a very non-binary way. And for example, in when I'm working as a nurse, uh, I can have one room that perceives me as a man for the entire 3 days, and another room next to them perceives me as a woman. Um, and I'm completely comfortable moving through that the whole time. So I go from room to room. I'm exactly myself. I stay exactly the same, and nothing about me changes, but how I'm perceived changed. And I don't feel any need to correct people because um, I'm comfortable in all of those spaces. Um, I mean, I identify predominantly as a non-binary woman, um, but I don't feel any need to correct people's perceptions of me because I just move through the world exactly as I am, and I'm comfortable in all those spaces. Um, I mean, it gets awkward sometimes. I did have a woman, I had to give her a suppository, and she said, you know, that she actually preferred that a lady do it. And so then I was, I had to stop and say, now, okay, I probably should address this. So, I told her, like, I don't know if you know, but I am a lady. And she got very, apologetic, which is, often what people do. But and I know it's different for me. It's less dangerous for me to exist in this not, this space. Um, I mean, it's still I have to be very aware when I go to visit my family in the South and when I'm just traveling in general or going into public restrooms. There's danger there. I have to be aware. People can be reactive. Um, and there are still situations where it's more of if people perceive me one way and then they realize or they think then they realize I'm something else, then there's, a threat there. But it's much less so for me. Um, and so part of that is just me being getting to the point where I'm just really comfortable with myself and who I am. And it took a long, long time. Um, and so much of that was not so much me because I've kind of always been me. It's been, um, you know, kind of society's acceptance and the way that I am received, that has changed. And I can look back at work I've made and kind of cringe the same way I can look back at pictures of myself when I see that I'm trying to fit myself more into societal standards. And I moved in and out of that through my whole adult life. And it's hasn't been really until these last like probably even less, like 5 years or so, that I've just really gotten super comfortable with, who I am. Um, so yeah, but yeah, it takes a lot of time. You don't get to, it takes away time and energy from focusing on um, other things. And I think that that's also a part of the reason why my work has been able to really change over these last 5 years, is because I have the mental space to do it, because I am not, like, I'm not looking inward so much from that perspective. I'm looking more outward and inward of my response to that. So yeah, that's kind of how that came to be.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful explanation of getting to know yourself over time, and I don't think everyone gets that. So
Yeah.
it's nice to hear that has been a progression. One of the reasons I brought this topic up is I grew up in the South, and I had a lot of queer friends, and we used to talk. What this was like 20 years ago about maybe you should just go to San Francisco because that was the only place that we could think of, and just see that this is normal. Like we just live in a really weird place because I grew up in Southwest Virginia, which is not quite the same as Alabama, but similar, Bible
It's
Belt
super similar.
vibe. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, totally. And I don't know if you feel this way living in New Jersey, which I'm sure you experience this, but I have this weird, like, uh, I feel super protective over the South at this when I'm outside of it, because people just love to trash it.
Uh-huh.
And there's a lot of beautiful things in the South, and there's a lot of amazing, beautiful people in the South too. Like, um, there's a lot of smart, open-minded, and I still say this all the time, that you cannot beat an open-minded Southerner. Like, best people. um, but then I also, especially every time I go back, I'm reminded of how hard it was, and not just to be queer, but I mean, I had, it was like all the weirdos would band together in high school. So there were no cliques, because it was just anybody that was weird in any way, shape, or form. You were holding on to each other. Um, and so it was really rough for anybody that didn't fit into the mold of the expectations. The expectations of gender roles is still pretty strong in the South, along with other things. But yeah, it's slowly changing.
Yeah, my wife and I have been talking about this because our daughter, who's 9 months old, the way that I think she's going to interact with the world in terms of her own gender is so different than my dad, who is 79. And
Hmm.
we notice like he genders her in a 20-minute conversation, he will say girl like I don't know 10 times. It's weird. It's like a
Yeah,
fixation on gendering her. And I'm just seeing
yeah.
my child who at this point I don't even think about as having a gender. So it's weird. My wife and I are just trying to like think through this. Like how is this generationally so different? It's just so different.
It is so different. Kids aren't phased by it, I mean, if that's what's kind of the way it's always been. I mean, I think that there's still a lot of work to be done to move things forward, but yeah, it's completely different, even from like our generation to your daughter's generation.
Well, to wrap up, can you leave some ways that people could contact you, either Instagram or your website? So if people want to get in touch, they can.
Sure. Everything is Patty Bilbro. So pattybilbro.com, and my Instagram is Patty Bilbro. And that's kind of the only social media. I think I might have an old Pinterest page that I should probably just delete. But pattybilbro.com has all my stuff on how to shop. I don't put a lot online for sale this much too much these days. I have local galleries that I work with, and they do sell my work online also if they're interested in work. And I have links to those on my website as well. Mud Mittens is our collaborative name, and we just made a website that has all the videos. So that's mudmittens, one word.com. Yeah, mudmittens.com. If you like super weird, raw videos. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. Well, thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been a lot of fun.
I'd like to thank Patty for coming on the show. It was a pleasure to chat with her and to learn more about her work. Also wanted to take a minute to thank today's sponsor, Amico Brent. They are sponsoring this episode of the show, and they are also a network sponsor at the Brickyard Network, so we really appreciate their support. And if your organization is interested in becoming a sponsor of this show or one of our others, you can get in touch through our website, which is brickyardnetwork.org. I'll be back next week with another episode. Thank you all for tuning in. If you'd like more information on the artists on the show, or if you'd like more information about the workshops and events that I'll be having in the next couple months, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook under Carter Pottery. Another great way to support the show is to leave me a comment on iTunes. To do that, search Tales of a Red Clay Rambler under iTunes Podcasts, and you'll find a page that's linked to our show. Thank you guys for the support.
We respectfully acknowledge and honor all Indigenous communities whose lands we reside on in the United States, and recognize that we are uninvited guests on the occupied, unceded, and ancestral lands of over 500 nations indigenous to North America. By acknowledging and reflecting upon the contemporary lived experiences and histories of the Indigenous peoples here and globally, we may begin to take essential steps towards creating a more equitable world. Learn more through the hashtag Honor Native Land initiative of the U.S. Department of Arts and Culture, and consider contributing to Indigenous-led organizations doing important work to further health and wellness, sovereignty, and self-determination of the first people of the lands you reside. This podcast is a production of the Brickyard Network, an extension of the Archie Bray Foundation for the Ceramic Arts. To find out more about our lineup of ceramic podcasts, visit brickyardnetwork.org.